Okay, everybody, shalom and welcome to the Yishai Fleisher Show, broadcasting live on the Land of Israel Network and on my Facebook page and on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us. We had a little technical difficulty in the last one, so we're restarting now, and I hope that you're going to enjoy the next hour. We have a lot to talk about. We have to talk about simple questions like, was King David real? Or do you believe the New Yorker article, which kind of makes him look like not so real? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Torah portion of Chukat, which has in it the red heifer, right? The red heifer, that's weird stuff. And how does that exactly work? And my contention, which is that it's the magic sauce, the secret sauce for the eternity of the Jewish people, which is a great value. We'll also talk about the battle of narratives. And in general, we'll touch on the issues of Parshat Chukat, which has a lot of the weird stuff in the Torah, including the death of Aaron and Miriam, the now announced passing away of the great prophet Moses, snakes, striking water, weird poems, weird poetry, and of course, as we said, the red heifer. In order to get us through these challenging questions, we have one very important person, none other than Rabbi Mike Foy. Rabbi Mike, shalom and welcome to the show.
Oh, shalom, Yishai. As you were talking, I thought that perhaps the better title for the show would be Red Herrings and Red Heifers.
I like that. Red herrings and red heifers. That's good. I like that a lot.
Because there's a lot of false leads being thrown out in all the stuff that you just listed.
That's right. So, that's right. I like that. Red herrings and red heifers.
I give that to you as a free gift.
I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you for that. And I want to say hi to everybody that's going to be joining us on the show today. God bless of you. God bless all of you. I recommend that you post your questions here on either Facebook or on YouTube. I already see my good friend Eric Ross and many other people, friend Dan Mastery and Golda. A lot of good folks already here. Post your questions. But last week we've learned from my good friend Eric recommended that we only discuss the serious questions that are thrown out. And at the end of the show, once I say goodbye to you, I'll also schmooze with some of the folks. But if you want to ask serious questions, please feel free to do so. If you don't want to ask serious questions, don't do that and just say hi. That's also okay. But that's not what I'm going to be reading out on the show. I just want to start off by saying that I was invited today to debate somebody next week about the so-called annexation, the new word that I came up with, which is sovereignization, because I wanted a verb for annexing, for sovereigning. See what I'm saying? Sovereignize. I want a verb. Yeah, to sovereign. That's right. And like to Google, you know what I mean? I want it to become a verb.
Well, I mean, by the way, there is a verb. It's called to rule.
To rule.
Well, if you're sovereign, you rule. That's what sovereign does.
So you extend rule. You extend Israeli rule. You rule. Okay.
You rule.
I'm gonna.
Rule.
That's the second.
Already like no. You rule. You don't rule. That's been our problem all along.
I'll be using that tonight. I'm gonna have to borrow a second one from you. Red herrings and red heifers and sovereign's rule.
Yeah.
Sovereign's rule. I'm gonna make a shirt like that, man. Sovereign's rule, man.
We're right there, man. I was just about to say that.
Sovereign's rule.
My wife has been gone for weeks, and she got me a T-shirt. My wife goes away for a month, and all I get is a stupid T-shirt. But it says "socially distant" before it was cool. I knew you'd appreciate that.
That is good. That is really funny. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, I was invited to debate in Tel Aviv. Just in parentheses, whenever I get a chance to go to Tel Aviv, whenever I'm invited to go to Tel Aviv, I like to go to Tel Aviv because I always tell people, like, I never want to be one of those Jews or Israelis that say, "Oh, I'm a Jerusalem Jew. I'm up here in the mountain Jew," and never come down and hang out with Tel Aviv. No. Tel Aviv is
guilty.
But Tel Aviv is our country. It's our land. It's one of the centers, one of the hubs.
The weather.
The weather. Okay, all right. But I just want to I want to feel like Tel Aviv is mine. So I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy Tel Aviv. So I'm looking forward to going there. Anyway, so the guy was like,
"It's your kosher New York."
What's that?
It's your kosher New York.
It's my kosher done. You know what I mean? It's my.
But you know what I mean.
By the way,
you've spoken about your relationship to the city. You don't have to be shy.
It's true. But I can't feel the same way with what's going on. I can't feel the same way about it. You know what I mean?
The love is gone.
I don't want to be in New York right now. I want to be in Israel, and I'm thankful that I am in Israel. And speaking of that, by the way, there's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Jews who are really starting to consider a life in the land of Israel, so-called Aliyah, right? And therefore, I wanted to put up a banner for everybody to check out, which is a banner of the organization that really brings Jewish people from North America to the land of Israel, and that's Nefesh B'Nefesh. And you could that's right. You could just get in there, and Malka Fleischer always recommends just fill it out one time, fill out a form, and let the process begin. You don't have to do it immediately, but let the process begin. Put your kind of name down on paper that you want to go to the land of Israel. I think it's like a religious thing. You should do it just as a part of your.
I mean, it is kind of a religious thing, but I know what you meant.
Just tell people, tell the world, tell the universe that you want to go to the land of Israel. In any case, so I was invited down to Tel Aviv to debate. So the guy starts questioning me. So he says to me, well, what side of the issues are you on? Are you for annexation, sovereignty, or are you against this plan? So I said to him, well, it's a little bit of both, because I'm for ruling or being sovereign in the land of Israel, but I'm against any motions towards the two-state solution, a Palestinian state in the heartland of Israel. So I don't remember exactly what the next step was, but he says to me, "Oh, I guess we can broaden the questions to the bigger issue here." I said to him, "You have to. You can't talk about Israel being sovereign if you don't ask the simple question: is whose land is it? And do you believe that any other people have a legitimate right of self-determination on this land? And if you don't believe that, what do you think the status of the Gentiles, other people living in the land, is? You've got to get to these things." And he says to me, "Yeah, you're right. I don't think we could just talk about this as like small politics." I'm like, of course not, because this whole thing is a large question about who we are. Yeah. But on the other hand, Rabbi Mike, there's a lot of people who would like to talk about this in small steps, in small ways, and kind of claim that we basically are in parts of Judea and Samaria because, okay, we put some population over there, and it's kind of historically important to us, but it's not like a grand narrative. It's a very small narrative. It's not a they don't want to deal with the big picture, the big questions of whose land it is. Do you believe that others have a right for self-determination there?
And that's for any number of reasons. Some of them is because they lack any coherent narrative themselves, and the classic sort of biblically rooted story of the Jewish people either doesn't speak to them or actually speaks against what they believe. But the other one, as we were speaking about before the show, is never undervalue shitat salami as a method in Israeli culture. This idea that just a little slice, like, no, you're going to grab the whole thing, just a little slice, and that's how big problems become manageable. In the early Zionist phase, it was the pragmatic camp's motto was one more dunam, one more goat. We want to talk about statescraft and
right, but that wasn't because they were saying let's redeem the land one step, one earth. What's it called? I don't know.
One more dunam, one more goat. Yeah,
right. One more shovel load at a time. But that was because that's what they had to work with.
Oh no, it wasn't because there was competing philosophy of political Zionism that said, no, we need to go to the Sultan, we need to go to the Kaiser, we need to work with the British Empire, we need to make like a international issue out of this, and they'll decide that they will just give us this land as a whole. And that the sort of pragmatic element is very deeply bound up with core Zionist, not just philosophies, but history of action. I hear a lot of the debate in the exact same language amongst the different sides of the leadership in Yudan and Shomron over whether the Trump deal of the century is like, let's just take what we can get now, or whether it's a betrayal and it's creating, like you said, a Palestinian state within our homeland. A lot of it comes down to the same question.
Yes, but there is one. You're totally right that the language is the same. It's the same question, but there is one major difference.
What's that?
The early Zionists were coming into a situation where there was no state, no success. Jews were poor. Jews were broken, and we needed a little bit of kindness from the nations in order to give us some status or recognize our status. We were nowhere. Today, we're a big, strong country. You have to make that transition. You can't be like the big elephant who's still chained by the little, by the little chain. There has to be some psychological change. In this case, sovereign rule or declaring sovereignty, asserting sovereignty, it's in your hands.
Yes.
And we've already been shown that. You're saying that we're back to those pre-state or early state debates, but Menachem Begin already showed us when it was time to assert sovereignty in the Golan Heights, he did so, and didn't mind waiting 38 years for America to recognize it. He just went ahead because he thought it was right.
It's true what you're saying. I mean, on some level, we're already sovereign, which is why I think that the verb you're looking for is rule. What we need to decide is, are we going to rule or not? And since 67 basically, but really functionally since the early 70s when the settlement movement really got off the ground in the aftermath of the crushing blow that was the Yom Kippur War, where even though ultimately we were victorious, it came at a huge price. Where our ambivalence around Yehuda and Shomron in particular just became definitive. And actually the last thing the government wants is to rule. I mean, as I'm sure you're familiar with, Menachem Begin himself, even though he was very supportive of the idea of Jewish settlement and the right of Jews to live, certainly in the homeland, at heartland, not anywhere, refused to be sovereign. He wanted the settlement movement to just keep operating sort of under the radar, and he would retroactively sort of like give his gushpanka to whatever it was they were doing. And that was precisely because the idea of being sovereign still scares the pants off of the most... with the exception of some really native-born, not only in the physical sense of native-born, but I would say in the intellectual, ideological sense of truly native-born Israelis, to say, like, well, wait a minute, we're a country in the Middle East. This is what we do.
Well, I just want to say, with regarding to Menachem Begin, that's not what he's remembered favorably for.
Nope.
No, he's remembered for Osirak bombing. He's remembered for recognizing the Golan Heights. That's what he's remembered for, and he is also remembered for the Sinai peace deal, which in his time was a seemingly brave move.
Listen, it was for sure brave. Whether you think it was a good move or not is its own question.
Right. Quite right.
Well, we've had this debate before.
That's right. We have. Let's go on. There was an article in this week's New Yorker in the magazine. I didn't see it in the magazine. I saw it online. And basically, what was the title of the article?
In Search of King David's Lost Empire. I haven't.
Right, In Search of King David's Lost Empire, and it's a long article, as is the
nature of the New Yorker.
The nature of the New Yorker. It's a long article filled with a lot of interesting stories, a lot of interesting people.
I really enjoyed it.
It was a fun article, kind of. It was a fun article because it kind of let you in to the picture of the tensions between archaeological camps. And it also threw in the power of archaeology. You see, if you're just digging up an old civilization, okay, so you can debate it, you can debate whether they existed, didn't exist, what they did, what they didn't do, what they ate, what they didn't eat. It's all fine. But here, archaeology is a political tool. It's a tool of truth. It's a tool to substantiate.
It's beyond just political. It's also religious. No, let's not.
It's religious, right? It's good.
The primary tension in the article is between the sort of pole of biblical archaeology, which is the Bible in one hand and the shovel in the other, and the pole in biblical archaeology, which is the Bible is irrelevant. Just give me the shovel, right? And I think
or another pole, which is I will either prove the Bible true.
To hack the Bible apart.
Right. I'll either prove the Bible true or I'll prove the Bible untrue.
False. Right. Yes. Right. That's probably, I think, a more honest way of characterizing the agenda that lied behind the article.
Right. But it's kind of funny. Like if you're like digging up, I don't know, let's say, some Roman remain in some European.
Let's be more specific. You're digging up the foundations of the city of Troy. And you want to know whether the Iliad and the Odyssey were based on a true story.
Right.
It's like, okay, interesting, not interesting.
Yeah, it's academic. It's academic.
The Greeks and the Turks aren't going to go to war over whatever it is you find.
That's right. And And here in Israel, it is that way because in the end, archaeology was used by the early Zionists, the early state founders, to substantiate a claim that this is the ancient Judea, this is the ancient Israel, this is the ancient Jerusalem. Here's where these battles were fought. The Bible is a document of history, it's
not just the founders; it's ongoing today. That was part of the point of the article.
That's right. That's right. But the other point of the article was also its own tone. It was not a neutral tone, and the tone was it had two narratives that I identify. One narrative is this is a narrative that Israel is messy and there's constant infighting and it's always a big fat mess and you'll never make heads or tails of it.
But there's not an unfair narrative.
It's not an unfair narrative, but there's a purpose to that narrative. The purpose of the narrative is to make you turned off. It's to take out.
That's why I came.
Right, but cynicism is in many ways the new Amalek. It's the new Amalek energy. It's the new doubt.
Yeah.
Right? So this article's full of kind of bitterness and doubt. It's like there's nothing sweet about it. There's no sweetness, there's no grandeur of spirit. There's no
sweetness, there was certainly no grandeur.
Right. It's all very personal and petty politics, petty.
There's a lot of pettiness in it for sure.
Right. And King David is at best, a kind of created imaginary character for people as an opiate of the masses, or maybe he existed.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think that's an entirely accurate portrayal of the article. I mean, she did give significant space to the fact that there's been waves. There's the original Christian archaeology, which was the Bible in one hand, shovel in the other, and then there was which then rolled over into the early Zionist archaeology, which was like, this is our land, we're in the natural sort of from the Tanakh el Palmach, right? That we're in a natural continuation of the Hebrews of the Bible. Then there was the pushback, which was inevitable in the 50s and 60s than every other country in the world. There's a whole revisionist, deconstructionist sort of narrative. What was interesting and to me most significant, it was how she pointed out that actually the pendulum has already swung, and that there's a whole growing not just body of evidence, but of advocacy and a perspective, which is like, wow, actually, the archaeology is beginning to substantiate at least the context and the fundamental narratives of the Bible. The personality.
My mother called me yesterday. My mom says to me that there's an article in Biblical Archaeological Review which says that there are 56 biblical characters that have been substantiated by archaeology. Like people, a lot. Yeah. People whose names have been found in records of other, countries and records of other empires, stamps, like real names. So she said the article claims that there's 56 of these. I thought that was an interesting thing. I haven't read the article yet, but I thought, wow, that's a powerful statement. Okay, reading this article led me to a realization. The realization was every single intellectual underpinning of the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel is under attack. Let's think about it. You have the Bible. Well, is the Bible true? The Bible not true? So it's criticized as a kind of fake written by a lot of different people, biblical criticism that happens in Israel as well. It's undermined. Then,
but pause before we go on. I just want to point out is that it's a deeper problem because what's happened is that the frame has been seized by people who in this binary of true, not true, right? That biblical criticism is an objective pursuit, and that therefore it controls the standards of measure. The other way to say this is that what if I told you that the Torah wasn't about the past? It's actually about the future, and that the truth of the narrative of David will be seen when we rebuild the temple, and the entire vision and mission which he embodied in his own life bears fruit once again. As opposed to, my first degree is in geology. Archaeology is a sketchy science at best. Right. I mean, it's gotten much, much more robust, but still. So just pointing out, like, even stepping into that narrative is already undermining it.
Right, but you'll have Arabs say to you, for example, now to the topic of archaeology, they'll say to you, there has been no finds of Jewish people in the past. An Arab told me once, he said to me, we've dug here in Jerusalem and there's no there's no facts about Jewish Jerusalem for the last 10,000 years. That's what he told me. Those were his words. I remember it because he said 10,000 years. Okay, but the opposite is true, certainly. But the point is that archaeology is a substantiation of our claim that we've had two commonwealths here on the simplest level.
It is, but the biblical archaeology to me is an irrelevancy. It completely misunderstands what the Torah is, and even what the Tanakh is. That's my point.
All right, let's go on. My point is
that's a hot topic for me.
Yeah, my point is that look, archaeology, the kind of archaeology that substantiates Jewish presence in the land of Israel, there are tremendous efforts to undermine it and to say it's not legitimate.
Sure.
The Tanakh itself, efforts to say it's not legitimate. Jewish history, oftentimes rewritten. There's all kinds of new historians who want to say that Israel has always been a violent and occupying colonial. Okay, so the historical, legal,
nationalists,
right? Now on the legal front, the great achievements of pre-state Zionism, of the Balfour Declaration and the San Remo Accords, all undermined by United Nations voting pattern and the Human Rights Commission and Security Council and Criminal Court. So an effort to undermine Israel's legal case. What else do we have? What's that?
I would say moral standing, which goes hand in hand.
Moral standing, absolutely. So because there's a new narrative that's being weaved, and every intellectual underpinning of Zionism is under attack. Every single one. And very seriously, by the way, very seriously, with books and professors and archaeologists and legal scholars. At every turn, there's an attack on the intellectual foundations of Israel. It's a war. It's an intellectual war in every single department that could substantiate the Jewish story one way or another.
Yeah, no, I hear it and I know it well. And to me, what it says is that we need to double down on the internal front, because there's and that's why I sort of started to go off on that tangent in terms of how it is we relate to the Bible, is that we need to let go of the Western intellectual constructs of historicity and literalism as the measures of the truth and importance of the Bible. Not that they're irrelevant and not that, like I heard you say before, is King David real? You know, I once had a student ask me that question about Yaakov Avinu. So to me, do you really think Yaakov was real? So you know what my response was? Well, we're going to get into the archaeological and the historical debate, especially when it comes to the Avot. I said, do you think anyone's going to remember who you are in 5 generations? He was a little taken aback. He said, 5? I said, yeah, 5 generations. So you know who your great-great-grandfather was? Maybe.
No.
Some people are into their... I said, unless you write the next great American novel, nobody's going to know who you were. But you're not going to question your reality. Do you know that more people today know who Yaakov Avinu was than ever in his lifetime? And more all the time. Mm-hmm. Billions of people. Mm-hmm. A third or more of the planet.
Right.
You're asking me whether I think Yaakov Avinu was real? Who are you? I'm like, no, really. No, really. No.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah.
But you understand that that's not just apologetics or an evasion. We come into the world as a people to assert a reality which doesn't hinge on this text or that interpretation. And because we're a people of text, we often sometimes forget this, is that we've come into the world to bring a reality of the divine. Mm-hmm. And that is a reality which is so much bigger than the texts or the stories that have carried us through history. It's even bigger than the vessels that were embodied in today. And just, we can't lose sight of that. And that's what I meant by doubling down on the internal front. We need to deepen and clarify and attach ourselves much more deeply to the truth as this, you're right, chaotic storm swirls, and doesn't just swirl chaotically, but comes in for those body blows.
Right. So just to mirror what you're saying, a tweet of mine: the attempted takedown of King David by the New Yorker is long, filled with archaeological infighting, and purposefully uninspiring. But King David's legacy, his Psalms, and his improbably rebuilt capital, Jerusalem, will outlive the attack and the magazine.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's okay. Very good. All right. Very good. Let me just put up two questions here that were put up by our faithful friends and listeners. Seba says, archaeological discoveries are to doubly support our faith in the scriptures. If we depend more on archaeology, then we are becoming faithless. How do you see this? Right. So I think that Seba is basically saying what you're saying, which is believe in the eternity of it, and archaeology will come in and show you parts of it.
Attach yourself to God in the present, because
Mhm.
that's what matters.
Mm-hmm. And Mark Rice writes, biblical archaeology is irrelevant at this point. No reason at this point to keep trying to apologize to the world for Israel's existence. It's time to be strong. Yasher Koach.
Yep. And
But at
never
the same
forget
time,
that the
though-
whole world of biblical criticism had its origins in, well, there's the Jewish side with Spinoza, etc., but as its origins in a culture which was never anything but our enemy.
Which was
The whole Wellhausen school and the Protestant attempts to deconstruct the biblical narrative comes out of a culture which had avowedly set itself to destroy our narrative, had failed to succeed for 1800 years. It has to be seen to some degree within that context. I wouldn't say that it makes it completely invalid from the outset, but it can't be forgotten.
I just want to say that when we do find discoveries, coins, or in Hebron we have a 2,900-year-old seal that says things in it says in Hebrew to the king of Hebron. There is something very touching about that. There is something
fantastic.
that it doesn't strengthen my faith, but does strengthen my intellectual understanding of our life here previously. By the way, speaking of that, Ariel Gold, who's a famous hard, I'm just saying for the audience, hard progressive, hard left, whatever you want to call her. What do you want to call her? What's the right term? I'm sorry.
Radical left.
Radical left. So she tweets today, FYI, I am great with tearing down any statues of Ben Gurion, Theodore Herzl, Menachem Begin, Rabin, etc., anywhere around the world. Also, any statues of Moses anywhere.
Oh, that's nice.
Right. So then my wife Malka writes, this tweet says everything about anti-Zionism. Those who desire the destruction of Israel in actuality seek the total eradication of Moses, what he represents, and the one whose message he delivered to this world. So it's not about equality.
If they're not actively seeking it, then they're just fools who are serving that purpose.
Okay, great. Well, before we go on to the Torah topics, I want to tell you that today's show is dedicated. That's right. My good friend Jake Bennett, a very good and deep friend of mine, sent in dedications for today's show. Therefore, the show is sponsored for these two names today. There'll be a third one next week. Dr. J. Harold Bennett, whose name was Yosef Heschel ben Yechiel. In honor of his 22nd yortzeit. Wow. That's a long time ago. He passed away on June 21, 1998. We hope that the dedication of this episode is in his memory, will support the work of this show in spreading Torah, the love of the land of Israel, and merit his neshama to have an aliyah. Just a little bit about Dr. Bennett. He was an orthopedic surgeon. He was a committed family man and committed to his community. The house was always full with 5 kids plus 2 grandpas for the last 15 years of their lives. A true example of the mitzvah of kibbud av v'em, the honoring fathers and mothers. Dr. Bennett's commitment to provide, this is very moving for me, commitment to provide medical care to those who could not afford it in Newark, New Jersey, was a driving passion that he was devoted to for many years. So the kindness was to the elderly, to the children, but also to others around that community in the kind of far-reaching community of Newark who needed medical assistance and didn't have the ability. That's how he lived, and we are honored today to remember his name. Yosef Heschel ben Yechiel, his neshama should have an aliyah. And also one more, Harvey Gilbert, who passed away this month in June at the age of 91. He's survived by his wife, 2 sons and 2 grandkids. A gentle giant. He was 6 foot 6 inches tall. He always greeted everybody with a brilliant smile, a soothing disposition, intelligent and compassionate in conversation. He's deeply missed by his family and friends, And today we are proud to sponsor this podcast of Torah and Eretz Yisrael in his memory, Harvey Gilbert. So Harvey Gilbert and Harold Bennett, two great men, and we remember them on the show today. And I want to thank my good friend Jake for sponsoring in their name. And if you ever want to sponsor a show in the name of your beloved ones or anything else, please feel free to write me, Yishai at YishaiFleischer.com. Amen.
Absolutely.
Beautiful stuff. I love that stuff. That stuff moves me. Okay, we have a Torah portion of Chukat. Okay, here's our trusty Torah. We have our Torah portion of Chukat. And the word chok means two things. It means the law, but it means either the law that is inscrutable, that is not always understood by mankind, or another explanation that I heard from Rabbi Yitzchak Shalom is that it means it's chiseled in type of law, which remains, it does not fluctuate, as opposed to laws that are mishpatim, for example, tort laws, that depend very much on the situation, depend very much on the facts of the case, and therefore do not change. Do change, as opposed to these laws, which do not really change with the situation.
There's another way that those two meanings intersect, which is that chok comes also from chakika, which is where Rabbi Shalom got that the engraving, right? Like chakuk al lukhot, like carved into. That's a way of conveying information, which instead of like writing on a piece of paper where you add substance to substance to get information, you actually remove something in order to get information. Meaning the chukim represent a relationship and an aspect of Torah where our ability to know is detrimental to our ability to actually gain the wisdom that they offer. Therefore, the very acceptance of the chok is simply incomprehensible, is the source of its wisdom. It's not just willful ignorance, I believe because I believe. There's a wisdom which comes in the chukim through our acceptance of the fact that we cannot comprehend them, that there's a larger frame of reference within which they're embedded.
Right.
It's a removal.
Now, the most classic of these kind of inscrutable laws is the red heifer, and our Torah portion starts. Is that not the right word? Like
Get used to it. I like it.
It's a law that you're not gonna make heads or tails of it, or this way, you're not gonna get the nitty gritty of it. You're not gonna understand how exactly it works.
Heads or tails of the red heifer. I'm just checking that.
Now, to me, the red heifer. There's a lot to talk about the red heifer, and there's a lot of writing on it. But I just want to make a point, and maybe I've made this last year, but I want to make it again this year, which is the red heifer represents an incredible strength of the Jewish people. I would say the strength,
really,
which I would say is what I call our victory through eternity, the victory of eternity. The thing is that the Jewish people's main characteristic trait, if there's one, is their survivability. The fact that they come through the ages.
We are the Energizer Bunny of cultures.
That's right. Last night I was thinking about this, and I thought to myself, what is the eternal meaning that the Jewish people saw their enemies, the Egyptians, spit out on the shores before them? It was a message for all of history. You will see great empires rise, and you'll see them crumble, and you'll still be around. That's the message. Yep. And the way that we are the people that we are, an eternal people, it's not because because we're gifted with being an eternal people. There are laws secret laws of the Torah that enable us to attach ourselves to the eternal and slough off the energy of death, which is a really hard thing to slough off because this world is filled with life and it's filled with death. You drive and you see that dead kitten who just got ran over by a car, and you're like, there's a body there, there's a death right there in the street. I see it. Yeah, you see it a lot. It's a small thing, but you crush by mistake a snail, and there's a death underneath your foot. We don't think about it, but that icky feeling that you get when you see that kitten smashed by a car, God forbid, that feeling is the feeling of the energy of death, and it's really all around. And the Jewish people were given a way to slough that energy off and to keep going, to be an eternal people. And I think that this Torah portion, which is actually filled with the death of two great leaders, Miriam and Aaron, And then also the news that Moses is going to not enter the land of Israel. In other words, he's going to die in this desert with this generation. We're being told that the great leaders who did the whole thing are dead. And you may easily say to yourself, we're all dead. This whole thing is dead.
You got to add to that a bunch of people dying of snake bite, meaning there is quite a bit of death and the fear of death by through thirst, through dehydration.
Right.
Yes, death stalks the party.
Right, death stalks. Remember, it's like the raven. You know what I mean? It's like the raven. Quit thy bust from off my door. There's like a death. That's right. There's like a death, energy. And the Torah portion says to you, hey, I'm telling you right now, there's a way to get rid of death. There's a way for the Jewish people to get rid of the energy of death, and you will keep going. You will face these things, but you will keep going. And that to me is the great secret of the Jewish people. We're not always the strongest, not always the smartest, not always all kinds of stuff, but we do stay eternal, even though we, by the way, have a large attrition rate of our own.
Yeah. But I think the way I would express what you're saying is that it's a matter of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning we we embody in the world a certain perspective, and we also must, within ourselves, experience that. And what's that perspective? Is that death is simply a narrowness of how you look at the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That whether you think of it in terms of the eternality of the soul, whether you think of it in terms of the fact that truth is ein od milvado, there is nothing other than God. Right, and therefore all separateness is itself an illusion, and death, of course, is the ultimate separation. Or whether you look at it through the arc of history and say, "Wow, there's something that just doesn't fit the picture about these Jews." Right, we just don't really fit the picture. Every construct, and this is why it annoys me to no end. Whether it's the current, fad for comparing our relationship with the Arabs here to the black-white issue in America, whether it's like they used to like to talk about like us in Northern Ireland as if we were like some package deal, or like I'm sorry, folks, there is no precedent for a people scattered and persecuted for 2,000 years who manages to recoalesce into a vibrant nationalist movement, re-seize its homeland, fight 100-year war, and reach the high water mark of history while the rest of the world is wallowing. Sorry, it's not going to work if you try to get your paradigm straight. Meaning we're an indication that there's something else going on. Mm-hmm. Which is why, going back to your point about King David, it's so important for those who oppose us to undermine the foundations on which that's built, be it the Bible, be it, because we represent, in another type of language, the place where the chibur ben shamayim va'aretz, right? That point of connection which there always must be in creation between heaven and earth, between the potential and the actual.
Great people always understand that about the Jews, and I think
which led them to try to eliminate us.
But for example, like Martin Luther King, I think he understood that. Mark Twain, I think he understood that. Eric Hoffer, one of my favorite authors of all time, the True Believer. You just see, like, they understand the Jew is a special thing. But I want to tell you, Brother Rabbi Mike, just for a second, that people are still harping, and the questions here are still harping on the archaeological moments. So I just want to, for a second, give people a way to express themselves. Archie says, I think that seeing the images of the golden bell in Jerusalem, or proof of years, can absolutely, as an idea, as something super real and tangible. What do you say about that?
Yeah, listen, I don't misunderstand me. I'm certainly not opposed. I have done plenty of guiding and even worked with the city of David in particular, and I know it as a very powerful platform for education. So I'm not dismissing this notion. I just feel that what the hour calls for is not archaeology. What the hour calls for is a deepening of the understanding of the significance of Torah.
You know what it is? I think that the people that are writing, like Archie, he's saying to you, like, this touches that part that I already knew, but it makes it realer for me. I see it. I could touch it. I could touch the past. Look here. Look at this. Yochanan writes, discovery of Professor Zertal Professor Zertal's what's the word? Are you lost you for a second? Are you with us?
I'm with you, but you're choppy.
Rabbi Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, Okay, so the discovery of Har Eval was one of the most important. The tabernacle at Har Eval was perhaps one of the most important.
Not the tabernacle.
The altar.
The altar. Joshua's altar.
The altar. That's right. Joshua's altar was perhaps the most important, as it establishes the place and renders Har Kabir Elon Moreh to be Har Bracha. Anyway, the point is that to him it was very touching, and my friend David Aiello asks, 1 second, and my friend David. Difficulties. Does Rav Mike not care what the archaeologists say? If the record went against us, if he were left with just a future-oriented belief, so you're getting some pushback there. What's your answer?
That's fine. I mean, obviously, I've devoted a good portion of my life to the study of history. So to say that I don't care what archaeology says might be an extreme. But I will tell you this: is that God is real to me. Mm-hmm. And the mission of the Jewish people is as real. It's more real than anything else that I know. The question of archaeology, I still feel, is a red herring. Put it this way: if I dug down to your life, Yishai, put you on the spot for a second, to age 16, and I said, "Look, here's Yishai Fleischer. This is who he is, right?"
You got me. That was my most troublemaking year. Yeah.
Okay. It's true, isn't it? All these events that we're going to trot out from your age 16, is it who you are?
Mm-hmm.
And if I failed to find some of the core elements of who you are today, does that mean that they're not who you are?
Right, but let's say you found a moment in anybody's history, let's say my history, where I was 9 and I did something awesome. You'd be like, you see, that's the Yishai Fleischer that I want to believe is
precisely my point. I'm telling you this as a counselor. This is what we do. We construct narratives. There is no such thing as a story without a perspective that brings all the pieces, fact, fiction, interpretation, all into one coherent whole. Archaeology is a piece of that puzzle. If it goes for us, because hey, if it goes against us, what do I care? Right? I really, and yeah, if I was left with quote unquote just a future-oriented belief, don't lose the present. See, because my whole perspective is we're telling a story of the past, which can create a people in the present who are empowered to build the future that the past asks of us. That's my dynamic. And so therefore, of course, the past is relevant, but it finds its real meaning in the way in which it drives us toward the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But and I think this is the last question that we have time for right now. Ruti is hearing what you're saying, but she says, nonetheless, in a world wherein we are constantly deluged with negative anti-God rhetoric, it is empowering to hear about archaeological evidence. It supports what we know. Everybody constructs narrative these days. I love validation, she says. That's
honest. And like I said, as an educator, great. Whatever works. Like I said, I bring people to your David. I've seen the power of such things. I've been with you in Hebron and watched you open people's eyes to what it has to say. I'm not questioning that.
Mm-hmm. I understand what you're saying.
I am pointing out, though, that once you make archaeology a standard, even for validation, you are stepping fundamentally into a non-Jewish frame of reference. So just beware.
What do you mean by that?
That the Torah is an internally true narrative, and you can say everybody does that, etc. Fine, I'll just reference you back to the fact that the Torah is also embodied in the Jewish people in the world and time, and doesn't really bear comparison to anything else, right? The whole Western intellectual construct based on the Greek culture is that the truth is subordinate to the facts, which is a myth, but is a very important myth of what's called objectivity in Western cultures. The Torah's perspective is I have the truth, and I'll use the facts insofar as it's useful and productive for you to comprehend the truth. But the truth is fundamentally, to go back to our Chukat discussion, truth is fundamentally bigger than what we can comprehend. It is bigger. God is bigger. The Torah is bigger. Therefore, so the facts at some point are going to break down one way or the other. So therefore, for validation here and there, okay, fine. But to step into this sort of notion of historicity and factuality as the standard of measure for truth is to step into the Greek Western culture. And I'm just not interested.
You're saying God is not science. That's what you're saying. The science is not going to prove to you God. You got to believe in God.
God is also science, I would say. But God is much bigger. God is also science. And God is much bigger than that. And even, by the way, the edges of Western scientific thought have already come to the recognition through much of the relationship between quantum physics and consciousness that we've gone way beyond just building the stories within which we live. We bring creation into being through our consciousness of it. And the implications of that for people who've spent 3,000 years cultivating a depth of divine consciousness are vast, profound, and we haven't even touched the surface. So I feel like I can petty down there in the potsherds about quibbling, and as you point out, which is you've already lost. They built a trap for you, and you stepped down there in the potsherds to scrape it. Nope, this one's from the 10th century. No, it's in the 8th.
Right.
You lost. As you
I just want to. I know it's time for me to let you go because of the time limitations.
I know, but you are on such a hot button topic.
Look at this, and look at this wonderful comment by Ruti again. She says, "Word," as in I agree with what you're saying. Everybody has a truth, quote unquote. I spend my life surrounded by millennials who want evidence. They're already immersed in Western culture. These are all tools to speak to them.
For sure, and I support it 100%. But don't. Just understand what we're
don't
doing.
Don't root it in that. Don't root it in
and understand that you're stepping into, so to speak, the enemy territory by having that discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean it's not useful. It doesn't mean it's not true.
I think for everybody, I just want to help people understand what you're saying, because what you're saying is a shtickle radical for some people, but I actually think that it's not so radical.
Look like I live in the suburbs.
Right. I think actually, I think that we should hear what Rabbi Mike says and internalize it and be able to have that part of our mind compartmentalize it and say, okay, there's a God and there's a truth, and I find true truth through Torah, and I make God real in my life. And the science and all the other stuff, archaeology, it's good, as we say, parparaot la Torah. It adds, it's a flavor, it makes it real. But don't walk into that full what is it called? Line and sinker? What is it? Something
hook,
line and sinker. Yeah, hook, line, and sinker. Don't make that the anchor of your faith. Don't make that the anchor, because it facts science gives and science takes away. You know, sometimes eggs are cholesterol filled, and later on they're actually good cholesterol. They're good for you.
Okay, that's the obvious part, that it's gonna what was true today will be false tomorrow. My point is that science is a lens.
Right.
It is not an objective truth. It's a way of knowing the world, and the way in which you know the world brings a specific world into being. Torah is the divine lens. If you know the world through Torah, you will bring that divine world into being. And as you pointed out, the problem with that article, in the end of the day, even though I enjoyed reading it because I have a lot of the background, it was useless. It was a waste of time. It added nothing to my life, right? Whereas the Torah can actually...
But for other people, it was a bittering agent.
Even worse.
Of doubt.
Yes. Because the most precious commodity that a person can have ever, and certainly in our time, is hope and inspiration.
Right. Exactly. And this was an article of cynicism and doubt, and made you just feel icky about the whole thing. Right. That's what these guys are about. They want to sow that doubt. Doubt is a narrative, by the way. Doubt is a narrative. It's not.
Oh, it is.
Don't think it's an absence of a narrative. That's what I mean.
I mean, as you've many times said, that Amalek is the sort of anti-Israel, the inverse. Well, Amalek is gematria safek. It is the equivalent of doubt. It is the other. By the way, not to say that Israel is the narrative of certainty, because as we said, when it comes to chukim, the world's too big for us to grasp. Israel is the narrative of wonder and inspiration, which is the real opposite of doubt. That's right. Now, I apologize, but I gotta go. Got a lot of kids waiting on a lot of rides.
Wait, hold on. Before you go, let me just put up your banner for a second here. I totally hear that. JewishStory.co is where you're gonna find Rav Mike's other shows and be able to reach out to him directly for anything from counseling to more learning. So, Rabbi Mike Feuer, thank you so much. Shabbat shalom. And I'm gonna keep going without you here.
Go with it, man. Go with it. Sorry, I gotta run.
All right. Wait. What was the slogan that we came up with before? Red herring.
Red heifers.
Right, and then we also say sovereignty rules, right? Sovereignty rules. Rabbi Mike Feuer, thanks so much. Shalom. God bless you. All right, folks, that was Rabbi Mike Feuer, but we're going to keep going because we actually didn't finish the Torah portion, and there's so much more for us to discuss. So let me just click on your comments here and see where you guys are at. We're not done. Golda says, thank you, guys, and I want to thank Rabbi Mike Feuer. but we are not done. So let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit more about this Torah portion, which is so fabulous. It's the Torah portion of Chukat in the book of Numbers. And one of the great stories is Moses hitting the rock. Moses, the people complain they don't have water, and Moses is told, bring your staff with you and talk to the rock. And instead he strikes the rock as he did previously, as he was commanded to previously. And so he is told, sorry, you did not honor me in front of the people, and therefore you're not going to go into the land of Israel. This is pretty mystifying for a lot of people and upsetting. It's actually, you're told that Moses isn't going into the land of Israel, and later Aaron is going to pass away. I think the way that we have to understand it, I recommend a way to understand it is through understanding a little shift that happens here, which isn't totally clear. But if you know how to read the text and you see the numbers, it tells you the dates and the numbers of what period they're in. And the period that they're in is the period right before entering the land of Israel. This is a new generation. This is not the old generation. And Moses here is angry with them, and he releases on them a certain amount of bitterness and bile that was built up from his sojourn with the generation of the desert that had passed away. And he says to them, kind of, you feel like he is dealing with them as though there's an accumulated frustration with their rejection of God, with their lack of faith. But God says to Moses, you belong to a previous generation. You belong to the generation of the desert. And the Medrash, which I saw this morning, says the Jewish lore, Jewish legend says, how could it be that a whole generation is going to die off, but its leader is going to go into the land of Israel? That does not fit. The leader's got to lead with his generation, and he's going to lead in the time to come, in the Messianic time when Moses arises again, and he's going to bring that generation back to the land of Israel. But it's not fair for you, the leader of that generation, to go into the land of Israel without them. And moreover, you've got a problem. You're still teaching this young new generation as though they are nothing but the continuation of the past. You've got to know how to make that separation. You've got to know how to be a new leader, but you're not a new leader. You're the old leader. Of course, please understand that I'm saying something with extreme caution, because Moses is our eternal great leader. He's the great tzaddik. There was never a man like him. Never a man will be like him again, says the Torah. Says the Torah bears witness to that. But at the same time, the man Moses at that time was relegated to his generation, and there needed to arise a new generation to come into the land of Israel. So that's I think an explanation on that. And then what we are going to have is we're going to have battles, a series of battles. First, Israel is asking their brother Esau, which is Esav, which is really their cousin, and they talk to him and they say to him, we want to pass through your land. And Esau says, no, absolutely no way. And he comes out to make war. The children of Edom, come out to make war, and they do not pass. The Jewish people do not pass through that land. The reason that's important is to understand that actually there were lands that were set aside for Esav, for Edom, for Edom, and the Jews didn't have right to walk in that land. They asked nice, but they were rebuffed. And there is a tension between Edom, and Israel, and that tension continued to show itself in this week's Torah portion, and they were blocked from going through that land, although it would have shortened their way. But the reason that God didn't allow the Jewish people to make war with the Edomites was because this was their land. This was land granted to them by God, and God said, you have no right to fight with them. So that's important to understand that. And immediately there, Aaron, the great peacemaker, passes away, and the Jewish household, the men and the women, mourn for him for 30 days. There's something about Aaron which is so special. We all have to know the Torah of Aaron. Aaron is a man who loves peace and yearns for peace. For example, the Medrash says that when he would walk past the camp, he would say hi to everybody. How you doing? How are you? What's going on? Nice to see you, Moshe. What's going on? What's new? And he was never haughty. But this actually had an impact on the people, because when they saw Aaron, when an individual saw Aaron say hi to him, when he thought about sinning, he would say to himself, how could I sin when that great righteous man said hi to me today? I must be on a higher level. He had that ability. He also had an ability to bring together people who had fought, husbands and wives or partners, people that fought, business partners, of course, people that fought with one another. He had the great ability to tell one person one story, another person another story, just to bring them together. And this power of love for one another is incredibly important. I had the great honor of visiting the long-held ancient site of Aaron's tomb in Jordan, in a place called, the Bible calls it Hor Hahar. But I was there with my mom. We went there on camelback, and that was an incredible experience to go to that very special place, very, very moving place. What an incredible view. And you could really imagine the whole Jewish people below you waiting for Aaron to come down from the mountain, but seeing that he did not come down, rather his son Eleazar had taken his place. I think that right now in places like the United States and around the world, we could all use a little bit of the energy of Aaron, which is to ohev shalom, rodev shalom, loving peace and chasing after peace, ohev et habriot, loving the created beings of God, umekarvan la Torah, and brings them closer to Torah. And I think that all of us, with the memory of passing Aaron, we could take that to heart and try to be a little bit more like Aaron, like the students of Aaron. We're running low on time, so I want to touch one more thing, which is when the Jews were bitten. Have you ever been to a hospital or to a medical clinic and you see that snake on a stick, right? The snake climbing a stick, and you're like, well, there's a Greek sign for medicine, something to do with the Hippocratic Oath or something like that. But no, friends, no, that is a sign from this week's Torah portion, which is the famous copper snake. So the story goes, the nation spoke against God and Moses, and they said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in the desert? There's no bread and there's no water. Our soul is tired of the manna bread, and therefore God sent snakes to bite the nation. Many people died. The nation came to Moses, Vayomru chatanu, we have sinned. Ki dibarnu be'Hashem uvach. We have sinned because we spoke against Hashem, God, and against you. Hitpalel el Hashem. Pray to God. V'yasar me'aleinu et hanachash. Pray to Him, and may He take away from us the snake. V'yitpalel Moshe be'Adam. And God said to Moses, and Moses prayed to God for the nation, but God told him, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, aseh lecha saraf v'sim oto al nes. Make an image of a snake and put it on a pillar. That's weird stuff. And everybody that was bitten, when a person would be bitten, he would look up at the snake and he would live. So the big question is, what does that mean? Does the snake make you live? And the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah asks this question, does the snake heal you? And the answer is, of course not. The snake doesn't heal you. But how many of us stub our toe and think immediately, why did this happen to me? I must have angered God on some level. I must have done something displeasing to God. How many of us have some kind of economic moment and then say, God, what have I done to displease you? Please let me pray and recognize my sins. How many of us can go one-to-one and change our pain into understanding that there's something to rectify? And I think that the copper snake was just that. When you were bitten by the snake, you looked up and there was a sign that said, you see, it's because of this. You have a snake because there's a reason there's a snake that bit you. It's not just happenstance. It's because God said you spoke badly. You spoke poorly. You defamed God. You libeled Moses. And because of that, I put up the snake to remind you that pain that you're suffering is from me. And therefore, do tshuva, repent, and you will be healed. And I guess the message for us is when we're seeing things happen around the world, we gotta look up to God. When there's pain that we're suffering, God says, look up and see that your pain is really from me. And I think that's a beautiful aspect of the copper staff, the copper snake on a staff. It was interesting that later on, people actually started serving that copper snake, and King Hezekiah had to destroy the copper snake because people didn't understand that exactly what I just said. This wasn't a sign for the copper snake wasn't the healer. It was a way for you to realize that this is a message from God. That thing that happened to you, recognize it. There it is. It's this thing that's coming from God. Recognize that. So the Torah portion has the death of Miriam, the death of Aaron, and also the telling us that Moses isn't going into the land of Israel. There's many other great aspects of the Torah portion, including wild poems and statements that are unusual. They're all in the Torah portion of Chukat, which means the laws that you don't understand well. And I like to think that Chukat, which means the kind of immutable, inscrutable laws, are also some of the inscrutable stories in the Torah portion. Now, let me end here by saying thank you very much for being with me on the radio show. And thank you to Ben Bresky and to Tabitha and to Moshe Herman for getting the show out around the world. Thank you to Facebook. But we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going with your questions in just a second. And let me also say that today's show is dedicated to Harold Bennett, who passed away 22 years ago. This is his 22nd yard site. And his Hebrew name is Yosef Heschel Ben Yechiel. He was a great doctor and a great family man. And also Harvey Gilbert, who passed away at the age of 91 this month, survived by his wife, 2 sons and 2 grandchildren. He was a gentle giant and a very sweet man. And today's show is dedicated in their honor. So we thank also Jake Bennett for remembering them through our show, and it's an honor to dedicate the show to them. We have much more great stuff on the way, so stay tuned for folks listening on the radio. And so thank you very much. And for folks who are with us on Facebook, let's keep going. I want to read your comments a little bit, so I got to get back to the top. So my good friend Eric Ross says, glad to see you rabbis live on YouTube. That's my brother Eric, and good to see you, Eric, as well. We have here my good friend Dan, who says Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. That's right, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz Sameach. We are the year 5780, corresponding to the Gregorian year 2020, and made the 21 days between the 17th of Tammuz, 17th day of Tammuz, and the 9th of Av, the 3 weeks, the weeks that we remember Jewish persecution and pain, and also God being upset with us. So Dan says, may these 3 weeks be a holiday whose euphoria and celebratory joy even exceed the amazing 21 days between Rosh Hashanah and Shmini Atzeret. Dan, thank you very much for that blessing, and God bless you. Shalom to Michelle. Shalom to Golda. And let's see what Yochanan says. He's talking about the British monarchy and church being fraudulent. This is not exactly my department, but thank you very much. If you want to send me a link, please do, to yishai@yishaifleischer.com. Now, here is an interesting phrase by Joel. Joel says, yet Theodore Herzl said that Uganda is our homeland. That is not true. That is simply historically incorrect. There was a point that Theodore Herzl considered Uganda, the Uganda plan, which was a British plan, in order to save Russian Jews who were dying by the droves in horrible pogroms. Within a few months, I think it was the 7th or 8th Zionist Congress voted that down. Nobody wanted that. Nobody believed that Uganda would be a useful plan. Don't forget that instead of the Uganda plan, there was another plan that people went to a different homeland. That's when Jews ran away from Russia and from Europe to America, the Golden and Medina. So the Uganda plan wasn't so crazy. It's just that a lot of people ran, instead of to the pre-state of Israel, to the United States of America. Mark says, regardless who lives in Judea and Samaria now, Israel fought for the land just like all modern countries. Obviously, Israel has the historic right for the land as well. Why all this discussion? Well, Mark, that's a good question, but the point is that we're being challenged on all these things. We're being challenged on our history and our right to war. The wars are deemed illegitimate. The history is deemed illegitimate. The God is deemed illegitimate. And I'm just trying to help people understand, A, the giant war of ideas that is arraigned against any intellectual foundation of Israel. and also to help answer those things, and also to make your point, which is we rely on something that's deeper that nobody can erase. Says Howard Rubenstein, good morning, guys from Long Island. Ribonut, sovereignty, is the word of 2020, and we've learned here sovereignty rules, right? Okay, let's see who else has got some interesting questions. We have our friends from Lynette says, Erev Tov, good evening from the Philippines. Thank you very much. And let's see, I've read some of your archaeology questions, but let me get to some of your final questions now. Let's see. Oh, a lot of good folks are saying different things, but really a lot of blessings from Ruti, from Ratanawati, with a great name. Let's see that name. Everybody could read that. We have a lot of blessings from folks from all over the world, and our good friends Ruti Eastman and Dan Mastery send their blessings. But here's one. Simon says, Mark, unfortunately, people of today need or want this proof. Hard to accept, but that's reality. Yeah, people need proofs, but people, and what I do a lot of times, and here's where I'm going to end the show today. This is actually a great place, Simon, for me to end the show today, which is to say like this: truths, follow me, friends, truths, any real truth can be analyzed and understood in many ways. Let me give you an example. Look at the room that I'm in right now. This room is true. It really exists. But on how many levels can you analyze it? Can you analyze it on the level of the light that's coming in? What's the power of the light in here? How is this building built? How is this room built? What pictures did Yishai put up on the walls here? What is the history of this building? Who built it? What is the history of the place? All these analyses will come up with truths. They're all true truths. Why do I say that? Because when something is true, something has endless complexity of truth. And that's why when I talk about the modern state of Israel, I'm happy to talk about it as a historical truth, a legal truth, the truth of the wars, the truth of our ancient kingdoms here, and God's truth, and the God's promises to the forefathers and mothers here. They are all true. So therefore, we don't really need to say, why do you talk about this truth, an archaeological truth, when you should be talking about this truth? I say, when something is deeply true, it is true on many levels. And my life, and I think your life as well, is really about connecting to the truth of Israel on many, many levels. Certainly the truer truth, the most deepest and unbreakable truth is the godly truth, that lens. The word lens that we learned from Rabbi Mike, to use science as a lens. But I think that the international law truth of Israel is true. The archaeological truth of Israel is true. The historical narrative is true. The Torah is certainly true. And God is true. And when you allow yourself to say, hey, when I'm dealing with this magnitude of an issue, I can really talk about it on so many levels and understand that the enemies of Israel also understand that. And they want to take those truths down one by one, all of them. They will attack all of our truths. And I think that's something to understand. They will attack every pillar of our intellectual underpinnings in order to undermine the state of Israel. They want to destroy us physically. We learned that in the Holocaust. They can't do that right now because God has given us strength. So they'll do that intellectually to the point that they'll think that they are ready to destroy us physically. And we're going to have to fight. We're going to have to fight for our truths, and we're going to have to fight for all those truths, our godly truth and the other truths as well. We have to teach them to our children. All right. So Mark Rice says, connect to Israel, connect to the truth. And I think that's a great way to end the show. Thank you very much for being with me, folks. And I want to remind you that there's great ways to connect to me, which is at YishiFleischer.com. That's a great way to connect with me. It's easy. That's where my articles, my videos, and my shows are. You could also be part of it. And I know we're all hurting through the coronavirus period, but if you wish to take part in the show, to have your schut, or maybe to dedicate your show to a loved one, please help me keep broadcasting by going to YishiFleischer.com/donate. That makes a big difference. And I also want you to visit our sponsors. For example, the folks at Chelet.com who had a big sale last week. It may still be on, I think. So check out TEKHELET, and that's to get the blue string. So you could be a true blue. True blue. This is, by the way, archaeology and history coming to life. So go to Chelet.com, and if you put on at the end when you're checking out, after you purchase something, put in coupon code Yishai, and you will get 5% off. That's really important. Of course, my day job is I'm the spokesman, the international spokesman for the Jewish community of Hebron. Check out what we're doing, hebronfund.org. We're holding on. We are the Knights of the Machpelah. We hold on and protect the tombs of the fathers and mothers and bring millions of tourists a year, not under Corona. So come to us in a different type of visitation through hebronfund.org. And as I said in the beginning of the show, due to the situation out there, I do think that it makes sense for you, if you're Jewish and you want to consider living in the land of Israel, go to nefeshbenefesh.org, nbn.org.il, fill out the paperwork, the beginnings of the paperwork. It's light, it's easy, a form that says, I'm interested in living in the land of Israel. Teach me more about it. No matter where you are, I'm sending you my love. No matter who you are, Jewish or not Jewish, I'm sending you blessings from the land of blessings. And it's only Wednesday, but I'm already wishing you a Shabbat Shalom and Mevorach. Lots of blessings from this good land. Write me an email, Yishai at YishaiFleischer.com or Yishai at thelandofisrael.com. Both are great. Let me see. And yes, and just a lot of thank yous from Simon, who says thank you, from Ruti, from Mark, from Linda, from Timothy, from Jordan with a great name, and from Marina. I want to wish you all also just only the good things. Stay healthy through this Corona period. Wear your masks, wash your hands, and pray to the good Lord. And always stay connected to the land of Israel. Don't let Corona keep you out. Emotionally, physically, spiritually, be part of the great story of the Jewish people in the land of Israel and the true Torah and the God that is brightening every one of gives us life and brightens our life every day. Shalom. Shalom from the land of Israel and from Judea. Shalom.